Get your stinking rat out. It's late night large.
Hello and welcome to another Lockdown Large Extra Time. Tonight we're going to be posing the question of, is centre-back the most crucial position in a title-winning side? Now, to be clear, we're talking Premier League years. For obvious reasons, me and Mike don't have the kind of memory banks to take us beyond the Premier League years, so it seems quite handy to judge it by that yardstick. And I always think the Premier League years are a good time to start anyway, because that's basically when the back pass rule was introduced. So that's like modern game, basically. So, Mike, you ready for this? Are we going to start the clock and get our 20-minute debate underway?
Start it. Go.
All right, here we go. The pig has begun. Right, Mike. Now, is centre-back the most crucial position in a title-winning side? Now, the first thing I thought was there's potentially other positions that people always talk about. We're talking basically about the spine here, aren't we? So we're talking the only competing positions you could argue are goalkeeper, central midfield, or midfield engine room, and centre forward stroke target man. Now, my arguments against those are strikers. I certainly understand what people say when they say you have to have a clinical striker and whatever. My only argument against that compared to centre-back would be there are more clinical strikers around than elite centre-backs, I would argue. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, but then is that the position is more important, or just there are less often? It doesn't. Do you see what I mean? Centre back isn't necessarily more important on that basis. Now, I think it is, but on the basis of what you just said, centre back isn't necessarily more important. It's just
but
that doesn't make the position more important.
Don't you think the two go together though? What I mean by so say they're equally important. One is more rare than the other. That's why I consider centre back. What I mean by important, I mean it's important you get the decision right.
Yeah, and they are much more rare, aren't they?
They're like
these days.
Absolute hen's teeth getting an elite level centre back. So that's the argument I'd make against compared to strikers. And the midfield engine room, again, probably the same argument. I would argue that there's far more effective central midfielders around for elite teams than there are elite centre backs. So that's what I'd say.
What about goalkeepers?
Now, yeah, I did think about goalkeepers, and I think goalkeepers are almost as rare. The only argument against that I would make is, so we're talking Premier League years, aren't we? So some Premier League winning sides, I would argue, did not have elite level goalkeepers. We won, for instance, and I say we, me and Mike are Manchester United fans. We don't hold it against us. We won the title with Mark Bosnich in goal. We won the title with Fabian Barthez in goal, and a combination of like Roy Carroll and Tim Howard one season, I believe. So, you know, the argument is, I think you can just about get away with winning the title without an absolute top bracket goalkeeper if the rest of your team is finely tuned. But it's so difficult to go through a season without having usually a pair of elite centre backs, but at least one absolutely elite leader of a centre back.
Yeah, well, that's what they say, isn't it? Like games are won at one end of the pitch and titles are won at the other. And you know, it's true. You think there are lots of teams over the years that you think, okay, they're a decent side, or they've got some good raw ability, or they've got a good manager, or whatever, and they've been missing something. And how often is it always that something is, you know, sometimes it will be someone to put the ball in the net and get 20 goals a season guaranteed, but how often is it actually the centre back? How often do you say about teams like if they had a decent centre back or a decent centre back pairing, they'd be something else?
Yeah, and then the other argument, of course, Mike, is, you know, like you were saying about strikers win games and defenses win titles.
Yeah.
The thing about that is you can conceivably win a title winning 30 games 1-0. You know, so and you do not need a 20 goal a season striker necessarily to do that. You can get, if it's shared around the midfield, the wingers, the striker, you could conceivably get a top scorer on 11 or 12, and because you're so tight at the back, you can still win the league. You know, so what I thought I'd do, Mike, just to give it a little bit of context before we break this down a little bit more. So I went through the centre back pairings, and I mean, one of these is not necessarily a pairing because we remember that Antonio Conte won the title with Chelsea with a 3 at the back, so we'll have to consider that. But in terms of majorly, the title has been won with 4 at the back, with generally two centre back and a sweeper, however you want to call it. So when I went through all the Premier League title winning teams to figure out which centre back partnerships they had, now there's no point going through absolutely all of them, but some interesting things I came up with. So one thing's quite interesting, Mike. Isn't it funny how nostalgia clouds our memory sometimes? So we forget certain things, or we assume certain things happened when they actually didn't. So for instance, one thing I came across was what was it? So there's a couple of title-winning sides where we assume we knew that we knew which players were at the back, like it was a Bruce and a Pallister or something. But for instance, you look at 96, 97, the Manchester United that won the title on a record low points total. But the centre back partnership, there wasn't really a partnership. It was split between Gary Pallister, Ronnie Johnson, and David May. So that was, you know, a little bit ropey. I would argue that the weakest centre back partnership in Premier League history, in terms of sides that won the title, you probably understand what I'm about to say, because I would argue it's also the weakest midfield ever to win the title, which was Blackburn. So the centre backs that Blackburn Rovers won the title with were Colin Hendry and Ian Pearce. I mean, can you imagine winning a league with? You could argue that Colin Hendry, though, was a bit of a stalwart. He was a bit of he was a quality leader, so maybe he made the difference. But I mean, Ian Pearce, you know, I think the biggest club he was at, other than other than Blackburn, was West Ham. So to win the title with him I know Henningberg filled in now and again, but Henningberg was generally the right back.
Okay, so on that, then you take that side.
Yeah.
Who did they have up front?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, they were really effective.
So what actually won them the title?
Well, yeah, no, that's a good point. It was obviously their strikers that won them the league, because again, I'll go back to it. Their midfield engine room was Tim Sherwood and Mark Atkins. That won the league, that central midfield. So that was what I thought was the weakest, and then you could argue that the next weakest stroke, the most surprising, was obviously Leicester, wasn't it, with Chris Morgan and Robert Hughes. And I think the reason why they were most surprising was, aren't we used to seeing centre backs that complement each other in the sense?
Yeah, I mean, even more surprising probably Wes Morgan.
Sorry.
But yeah,
I realised that you were about to correct me. Yeah, sorry, Wes Morgan.
Are you saying that basically they're too similar? I mean,
no, that's what I was arguing. Yeah, they're both slow, but they're both big powerhouses, dominating the air, good man markers. But I mean, neither of them had pace at all.
No, I don't. I mean, do you know how many goals Leicester conceded that season? By any chance?
Probably should have done some research on that. I'll check that out while you.
The other thing I would say is they had the top goal scorer that season in the Premier League, Jamie Vardy. So
yeah, so the argument there would be that
is it that Wes Morgan and fucking Robert Huth, absolute donkey, are they?
Hold on, hold on. Robert
Fantastic
Hughes.
centre
Robert
backs.
Hughes won a Premier League with Chelsea as well, Mike.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I'm not sure you can be a
what?
donkey.
So he's the world's best defender, is
I
he?
didn't
In
say
that case, what are you so surprised about?
bloody straw.
He's so fantastic.
Okay,
He
shut up.
probably won the league on his own.
Let me have a look. I'm just checking out how many goals Leicester conceded. So in the Premier League, in their title-winning season, they conceded 36, less than one a game.
Fucking hell.
So,
All right. Okay.
I'd argue that's a very good performance.
Yeah. I mean, you probably look at style of play, don't you? And their tactical setup rather than actually who's got the best players. Obviously, what they did that year worked for them. Probably worth saying that everyone else was such a shite that year, which don't take it away from them, but I mean, it helped, didn't it? It helped not have a team to play against.
Would you say that Leicester and Blackburn's title-winning seasons were quite similar, in the sense that, first of all, I mean, Leicester's was a lot more shocking because Blackburn had spaffed loads and loads of money at getting as many good players as they could. But what I mean is both of them were very well drilled into a very simple system. In fact, it was quite similar. I mean, Leicester's was mainly, hit on the counter from deep, hit Vardy behind the lines, and their wingers were relatively active as well. Blackburn's was generally get it down the wing, fire it into the box early for Shearer and Sutton to gobble up.
Yeah. Well, that's enough about title winning teams.
Yeah,
What about centre halves?
Yeah. Okay. So some other interesting things I discovered, Mike. So
No.
we've got the classics. So we've got the Bold, Adams, Keown, Stam and Johnson. Got some very ropey ones as well. Again, like 2001, we won the title with a combination of Stam, yes, but Sylvester and Brown were the other centre backs. So you could argue Stam maybe dragged them to the level required. The 2002 Arsenal team had a combination of Sol Campbell, Martin Keown, but also Gilles Grimandi, who was a pretty good deputy. 2003, which I think is one of Fergie's biggest triumphs. So the centre backs, this was quite evenly spread with the appearances. Rio Ferdinand, who, remember, this was quite relatively early in his career. 2003, Rio Ferdinand, John O'Shea, Mikael Sylvester, and Wes Brown. So those were the centre backs that won the league. Then it was obviously it went back to Arsenal with Sol Campbell and Kolo Touré. Then we had the Terry Carvalho stroke Terry Gallas. So you'd argue again very strong partnership. Do we notice that generally in these partnerships, Mike, is it too simplistic to say there's always one with certain attributes and the other generally has other attributes that they lack? So you'll have a dominant, aerially dominant, physical sort of man marker, and then you'll have another pacey recovery, reads the game better. That kind of.
It's a nice thing to have, isn't it? Centre backs that complement each other. I mean, from the list you've read out, though, it's not necessarily crucial that you have that. It depends on what system you play and how the players around them kind of work within the formation or whatever it is they're trying to do. But obviously, it's nice. It's nice to have one that's quick if the other one isn't. It's nice to have one that will dominate everything in the air if the other one won't. But that goes without saying. But obviously, it's not crucial because people have won the Premier League without having that.
Okay. Would you, Mike? I would argue that if we talk about, say, the absolute best, the cream of the crop centre-back partnerships, if we were to judge them by how many Premier League titles they won as the number one centre-backs at a club.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, go on.
The winner is Ferdinand and Vidic. So 4 title-winning sides had Rio Ferdinand and Nemanja Vidic as the 2 dominant centre-backs. No other partnership comes close. Well, sorry, Bruce and Pallister come close. But those are the only, John Terry's won a few, but they were with different partners generally. Ferdinand and Vidic, I'd argue, is potentially.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the best, but I don't think anyone would argue with that, would they?
No, okay. So
Would argue with that.
with in recent years, then we've had Kompany and Lescott, Vincent Kompany and Johnny and Lescott. We had and then a combination of the two of them and Demichelis, Terry and Cahill, Morgan Hughes, like we said. The three at the backs that Chelsea deployed was Gary Cahill, Cesar Azpilicueta, and David Luiz. So that's an interesting one to throw in, because the argument was that David Luiz was far too error prone and lackadaisical to operate in a two-man defence, so to speak. But then when they moved to a three, it was almost ideal for him because he could step up like a sweeper and he'd always have cover behind him. Where do you think they rank in terms of sort of centre-back units? Luiz, Azpilicueta and Cahill.
It's difficult, isn't it? You know, because you just said they won the league. But, I mean, you talk about them as individuals.
What did they do elsewhere?
I don't think any of them are really up to much. Azpilicueta, great servant to Chelsea.
I think he's a great defender generally.
And yeah, for me, I would say if I had to pick one of the three, I'd take him.
Is it fair to say the interesting thing I find about those three is, I don't know, maybe this is just generalising too much, but I look at the three and they all have different things. So I think Azpilicueta is the most talented defender, i.e. he has the best defensive skills and knowledge. David Luiz is the best footballer and Gary Cahill is the best leader. Do you get that? Do you think that's...
Yeah, between the three of them, maybe then they had the attributes that you'd want in a two. Ideally in one, but...
Because that's important, isn't it, Mike? It's not a matter of, oh, that's the best centre-back, I'm going to plonk him in there and we're going to win the league. It's, does this centre-back complement the other defenders, and can this centre-back communicate with the other defenders, and do they have a chemistry? You know what I mean by chemistry, where you're not having to talk to each other the entire game. You just start getting a sixth sense about where they're moving.
Yeah, they could work. You know, the attributes you talked about there, though, ideally, obviously we started talking about elite centre-backs rather than, you know, pairings and how they work. But actually, you'd want them in one centre-back, wouldn't you? You'd want that in one person.
Yeah.
You think of a centre-back, well, certainly for me, should be, or used to be maybe, or hopefully still is around, but... You'd want them to be a leader. You know, there's the argument, isn't it? You want 11 leaders on the pitch, but yeah, that's great. But just where they are on the pitch, that's a really beneficial quality to have in a centre back, leadership, even if it's just of the kind of the back 4, 5, or whatever it is, and that taking ownership of that line and that unit, as opposed to the whole team. They still need to have, or somebody needs to have that. So, and then, you know, defensive nous that you were talking about for Azpilicueta, again, if you're talking about actual good top ranking centre backs, you'd hope that all of them were good at defending, wouldn't you? Like, as in, I know that the modern game has changed a little bit, and not all teams necessarily need 4 defenders that can defend.
Very true, yeah.
It depends on, you know, the rest of the team, doesn't it, and how the manager wants to do it. And that's very much like where Luis, you talked about him being the better footballer. So, in terms of playing out from the back and things like that, Rio Ferdinand had all of that, didn't he? I think.
No, that's very true. Yeah. Anyway,
so what I'm saying is, you got all that in one top defender.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, no, you're right, because you see people like, you know, Marcus Alonso is another example for me. He's a superb footballer, but fuck me, is he a terrible defender? Anyway, sorry, to finish off with my strongest argument for what we were talking about. So my strongest argument for centre back is the most crucial part of the pitch is, to me, the story of the last 2 seasons. what happened last season with Man City?
Why you got to bring that? Why you got to bring us back up? uh,
What happened? No, what happened with Man City last season? They couldn't cope losing Laporte. They lost. They obviously lost Vincent Kompany to retirement, and then they lost Laporte. They couldn't cope without him. It was generally accepted they couldn't cope without him. Liverpool ran away with it. What's happened this year to Liverpool? Lost all their centre backs. The difference is City. Fair play to them, because they've lost their best striker and their best midfielder for the majority of the season. But what they seem to have done at centre back, Mike, I don't know if you've sort of paid attention to this, but John Stones has recovered his form, but they also rotate. So you get Stones, Laporte, and Diaz all kind of rotating at centre back. I'm pretty sure Cancelo's played there at one point as well. So Guardiola seems to have coached them. To me, he's got this very much this Cruyff total football thing. The defenders sometimes play in midfield, and they seem to rotate around the centre back area, and they're all performing to a high level. I don't know if you thought that, but
yeah, I mean that's. I think it speaks to the caliber of player they've got, but obviously, like you said, the way that Guardiola wants them to play, he's an elite coach, isn't he? So if anyone can get the most out of defenders or any players, actually, it'd be someone like Guardiola, wouldn't it? But
yeah, well, our time's up. So yeah, no, it was a good time to end, because Guardiola, fair play to him. This is the first time in his whole career we've actually seen Guardiola fail and then come back and try again. And to be fair to him, he's ripping it up at the moment. And like I say, personally, I think the story of the last 2 seasons seems to be one of centre-backs. Who's got the most effective elite centre-backs? And if they lose one or more of them that fucks with the chemistry, it seems to make the difference. That's also the reason why we're not going to win the league with Maguire and Lindelof.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You look at recent times. The reason Liverpool won the league, Alisson, you would argue, but it's because of Van Dijk, isn't it? And the reason that they fucked it this year is because no Van Dijk. I know they've had other injuries, but you could be forgiven for painting it as simply as that.
But sorry, I know we've overrun. We shouldn't still be talking, but just going back again to City could not cope without Kompany and Laporte last season. This season, they're missing their best player, De Bruyne, and their best striker, Sergio Aguero. Do you see that? So that backs up the point again that centre-back is the most crucial part of the pitch. They can lose their best striker, their best midfielder. They keep on going. As soon as they lose the chemistry at centre-back, that's what scuppers them.
Thing is that they haven't got one good striker or one good midfield player, have they? No. It depends not all teams could lose an Aguero and still have a chance of doing anything, or a De Bruyne and still have a chance of doing anything.
But look what
they've got pretty good deputies, haven't they?
No, but look what Guardiola. Yeah, but who up front? Like, look what Guardiola's done. He's not really playing Jesus at the moment. He's bloody managed to put Gundogan as like a false striker, and he's playing out of his skin. So anyway, enough licking Guardiola's asshole.
Yeah.
That was tonight's Lockdown Large Extra Time. Hope you enjoyed that. Let us know what you think. Stick a comment or abuse in the comment section. By all means, subscribe and the little bell. We try and get one of these out a week. Anything to add, Mike, before we go?
Nope. Fuck Liverpool.
Catch you next time.